Hello.
Back from a different part of the world, but ended up, as maybe you did, uh, watching a certain concert last night. Did you watch Elton John saying farewell, but probably not saying farewell?
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously written so many great songs, but his voice went years ago. Well, I saw him at the Great Orchestral Ground in
Yeah,
Harrogate about 10 years ago,
yeah.
and it wasn't great then. And unlike McCartney, who last year at Glastonbury tried for every note, and he didn't always hit them, but he really went for it, which made it quite touching. Elton decided, no, I'm not going to try for the notes. I'm going to create a new sort of voice that has got less risk of actually missing things. But
It
it sounded
wasn't
like a
easy,
sort of
wasn't
like
it? He
it was
used a
like a
different voice.
warbly pub singer. It was like a warbly pub singer. It was an approximation of what Elton John used to be, rather than an attempt to be Elton John.
Yeah. So that so
It was sort of fitting
so
image does Elton.
so is that detrimental then? Do you think that or was he actually just being practical? He's still
You got to
the showman
you
was surely still there.
got to cut him some slack because of his age. I mean, you
Well,
can complain about his voice
do you know who
good,
he
but
reminded me of, Graham, when he walked on? You, when we were going around Edinburgh, when you'd had your first of your hip operations, and he
yeah,
was
yeah, I
and
can properly.
he was hobbling on, and then
I know.
and then the suit started misbehaving, and by the end of the concert, the suit was barely on him, and
I,
the shirt had come out. It was like he wasn't
I
clearly.
honestly thought it was like a musical number from two Ronnies in the 1970s. Except with good songs, obviously, great songs.
Yes, yeah,
I know
well,
everybody loves it. It's Elton
mm,
John, so you have to like almost worship Elton John. He's such a nice chap. But to be critical,
yes,
you know, it was good, but I wasn't bowled over.
no. I
I know
love
a
the
lot of people were.
opening. I love the fact that it was back into the 70s with the Bitches Back and Pinball Wizard and David Johnson still having his hair from the 1970s. Nigel Alston
But
still on drum. It was all our yesterdays. In fact, the success stories of Glastonbury were Blondie, Yusuf / Cat Stevens. So where's the young comers making such an impact on music right now?
the damning indictment of mainstream music was Glastonbury.
It was.
And I now think Glastonbury, I mean, it's hard to knock it because it is the world's greatest music festival. It has literally like 150, 200 stages. There's hundreds of acts. The BBC covers only a tiny
Yeah.
percentage of the acts. So you get a true flavour of it. It's a huge, brilliant occasion in which you have lots of alternative cultures allowed to be given their own space still in the true spirit of the original Glastonbury in the 1970s. The only thing is that the acts that get the biggest crowds and which get shown on television
Mm,
are either really old acts or they're modern acts that aren't actually musically that good. So
mm,
and it seemed to me that part of the problem with the Arctic Monkeys was they tried to be interesting and clever, and that doesn't play in a big stage at Glastonbury
mm,
anymore. At Glastonbury, what you need to do is you have to be full of energy, full of emotion, and full of spectacle. And then the audience who've really come to have a party, they're not there to like stroke their chins and assess how good the music is, or wonder if that's a good interpretation or not, if that was on the album or whatever. They're not music fans like that. It's a gigantic party for a lot of people now, which means if you try to be clever like Arctic Monkeys or ironic, you're going to be in real trouble.
Well, I mean, the first mystery with Alex Turner was would he be there at all because of his laryngitis, or were we going to have Ronaldo appearing or not appearing in the World Cup final kind of moment? He went ahead and did perform, but are you saying that actually there's no place, therefore, for an ambitious form of performance at Glastonbury now? You have to play to the Coldplay rules of how you play Glastonbury.
I am because so for example, Stormzy when he headlined and did very well, went down very well.
Mm,
If he stood there in normal clothes without a spectacular lighting set in theatre and
mm,
looking magnificent with a backdrop created specially for him,
yes.
if there wasn't the theatre there and he just stood there rapping, I don't think it would have gone down very well. And the Arctic Monkeys ultimately were undone by not being crowd pleasing. They played too many tracks that weren't crowd pleasing. And Alex Turner adopted a strange sort of like Vegas singer persona,
Mm,
where every time he talked, it was like It reminded me of seeing Bob Dylan at Hyde Park in London in 2019.
Mm,
You could tell with Dylan if he was taking the mickey or not. It was like, are you being serious, Bob Dylan, or not?
mm.
And that's what Alex Turner was like. I was like, is he being serious? Is this irony? Is this humor? Or is it just how he feels? And it was very hard to tell, which made him a little bit like, I thought he was a bit like David Bowie in his Thin White Duke phase. You
Mm.
couldn't tell if Bowie was screwed up or being serious or being ironic or playing a character. And with Alex Turner now, even though he's a brilliant musician and songwriter, you can no longer tell on stage who he is or what he thinks. It's a very strange character, and the audience really didn't
But
like it.
you can take the boy out of Sheffield, and Sheffield is no longer there in him. Whereas with Jarvis, you still get a sense of Sheffield. In with Richard Hawley, you will forever have a sense of Sheffield. Alex lost in the great swathes of America. Has that in some ways meant a change of, let's call it, a personality? I don't think he's a clear set personality anyway. I think that's one of the things. He's never been easy to define in the way that the Gallagher brothers are, in the way that Jarvis Cocker is as a frontman. I don't think Alex Turner's ever been that clear a frontman.
I think you're right, because that's when I watched it, I thought I'm watching the last major guitar group that has a huge audience in Britain that
Mm.
can be tied into the spirit and ethos and standards of the 1960s and 70s,
Yep.
and to a lesser extent 90s. He represents something which is past now.
Mm.
He's too interesting, too clever, too obtuse, too himself, in the sense that he will not kowtow to the audience. He tries as much as possible to do what he thinks artistically is best, which means he no longer fits in a highly competitive world where you have to please people to get on. he
Well,
just he
I
just doesn't.
mean, arguably, I'm not saying he's outgrown his band, but he's very much, it's very much his show. It's very much him. They are very much background players that join up with him to make the albums, and even as we know, the recording sessions often done separately anyway. So um, that
Yeah,
becomes a question where Arctic Monkeys actually go next. You know, does he actually make a move and say that's it? You know, it's time to split
I
because
understand from a
Graham.
yeah, I get it from a recording point of view. You're spot on, but from a
Mm,
point of view, Arctic Monkeys, the way they look together, like
mm,
Alex is like open neck white shirt and
yeah.
loose grey suit.
Mm,
The rest of the band mainly in white shirts, but with dark brown 70s style leather jackets,
mm.
a bit like Criminals and Carlitos Way or
Yeah,
Serpico or something like that.
yeah,
Or
yeah.
what's the classic Brian De Palma gangster movie
Mm,
Scarface. Look
mm.
like guys who need men who hang about bars and occasionally bump people off. And they've got a great atmosphere. They remind me of Fontaines DC. They've become a darker band on stage, much like Fontaines DC are,
Mm,
except they have better songs than Fontaines DC in general. So I thought they were magnificent,
mm,
but I was irritated by Alex, and he's in between song, 3 or 4 words at a time,
mm,
strange dialogue. I didn't get it. So if I didn't get it, and I thought they were brilliant, especially songs off the car. I mean,
mm,
Mirror Mirror Body Pain, and
mm,
Perfect Sense were all supreme. But if
mm.
I didn't get it, what chance have the fans who really like AM and the first album got? They've got no hope of getting it.
No, no, no. But we're back to that place of actually what makes a big British band now. How how does the 1975 step up? Muse did step up, but it's still, you know, that's grand
They're
theatre.
all
Grand
Muse,
theatre.
Muse last throws of Queen. They're
Yeah,
Queen plus prog rock.
yeah,
A
yeah,
bit of noise on it.
yeah. So I mean, in terms of innovation, the Arctic Monkeys, since Radiohead, this is the most innovative, grandstanding, big scale British band. That's what they represent. They have gone through more changes, more experimentation, as has Radiohead, and that's what makes them more intriguing, that they've done that.
You're right, but the things for them in Radiohead is Radiohead have got a vast, hardcore, intelligent audience. And
Mm,
what from the sales of the last albums, what the sales of the last albums prove is that the transition that Arctic Monkeys have made on record, they
mm,
haven't built up a
no,
huge hardcore
no.
audience. Their hardcore audience is still the ones who like AM and the first
Mm,
album.
mm,
They haven't managed to like do a Radiohead, which is why you've made the remarks about them. Is there a future for them? But it's just going to be Alex Turner albums. That's because of that. If they'd actually built up a huge audience of intellectuals, they wouldn't have to think about that. You wouldn't have to think about that.
You
They
mentioned
haven't.
Fontaines DC. I mean, already the front man of Fontaines DC has now made a solo album. They've talked about the difficulties they've had together as a band recently. Within the band, relationships have become fractious. Already has made a solo album. So it'd be interesting to see what step they take, where they go next.
I think the big problem with Fontaines DC is they don't sell enough records, so they can't be making enough. The great soothing aspect of a successful band is the money. So even if you're not getting well together, it's all become a bit of a chore a lot of the time. If you're all being paid well, that sort of like makes you more reluctant to split the band up or go solo. But when you're not actually making that much money and you're having problems, well, what the hell? You're going to start doing solo about the future. I mean, the Boo Radleys have reformed, and we saw the Boo Radleys in Leeds together when they were brilliant. But they've reformed recently, and one of the main guys in the band has been an IT teacher for like decades since they split up. And the reason they split up was pretty much the same as Undertones. It wasn't they ran out of musical ideas; it was that they just weren't selling enough records or making.
No, exactly. That just the second part of the question, Graham, has Glastonbury Festival lost its way? Is it that you have to perform in a certain way now to make that scale of impact? Yet, is it only losing its way on that level? Because actually, the diversity now of stages that are there, the remarkable the number of bands that can play at any festival and other events that take place at this festival. So it's always about, it's not just about music. It is more than that. It is about culture overall. And I guess is it or is it not now a litmus test of where British culture is? If it's actually loads of families in who are rather middle class and wear their rather nice Wellington boots and turn up in their 4x4s with very swanky tents. Is that something that's gone wrong with Glastonbury? Is it better when actually it was hippies climbing over the walls for free? Is that something that's regrettable, those kind of changes?
I mean, I think as a Glastonbury Festival in the round has so many great aspects to it, still retain to its roots and its original spirit. But the mass face of Glastonbury, the Guardian coverage, the Times, the BBC, the fact that everybody's dog who don't even like bands knows about Glastonbury and might watch a bit of TV and read about it, that side of it has been now completely hijacked by crowd-pleasing old-timers and crowd-pleasing new-timers. There is no room on the mass level for interesting music. And what happens is that the TV wants a crowd-pleasing band to be on TV. The Glastonbury wants crowd-pleasing bands because it appeals to the audience, and it sets itself a very high standard. So the standard for being a headlining band now in the Pyramid Stage in terms of the crowd behavior is really high now. You can't go up there and do an Arctic Monkeys. It just doesn't work. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Once you get into the cycle, you have to be a crowd pleaser to being in the Pyramid Stage as a headliner. That becomes unavoidable. And it means you're definitely not going to put interesting acts as the headliner.
If I read it correctly, the BBC had 1,000 members of staff working there this year.
Well, yeah, they only needed 5, but there's 995 hangers on. That's what happened there.
I mean,
I'm only joking.
No, it's interesting priorities for the BBC, where they don't think it's necessary to keep some of their very best local talent and just quietly put them out to pasture. And so local radio goes down in quality, but they're quite happy to suddenly throw a load of people at one major event in Glastonbury. I suppose the reward is that 7 million people watched Elton John last night. So maybe that's what their argument in favour of that is. But even the fact that Radio 2's covering it as well as 6 Music at exactly the same time, wondered what that was about, for example, why that was necessary.
Separate issues. They should be supporting local radio, which they're now no longer doing because they're short of money thanks to the government. But the other issue is the amount of coverage. And if you think about it, there can't be another major country in the world with a rock music festival that gets so much coverage as Glastonbury. It's great because it means that that's music and that sort of culture, and it still retains a very strong alternative side to it. Is mainstream in Britain in a way which in America, imagine America. I bet you don't show Coachella Festival on CBS, and I bet the Americans don't all rush to find out who's playing this year. It's not that sort of thing. So that's good. I think it's great that It isn't just the proms at the Royal Albert Hall that are part of the mainstream British culture. Nobody can truly totally ignore. It's also Glastonbury, so that's good. But I think in terms of the amount of coverage which has gone up in recent years, I think what they're doing is they're saying that if we're going to devote a lot of resources and money to covering Glastonbury, we need to get the money back out by maximising coverage. So I think they've upped the coverage to justify the expenditure, if you know what I mean.
The other thing that seems to me to have gone is actually the skill of critiquing what's going on. So every single performer talks about they've just played the most amazing set. No one ever says, well, actually, it was a bit disappointing. I didn't play as well as I'd like to have done. There's no level by which everyone hasn't played the perfect set to an amazing audience, to an amazing experience. It's that thing, apart from using the word surreal, which really gets on my goat as well as a word, because no one uses it in the way it actually means. But and also the presenting skills, absolutely no one judging anything with any sense of critique at all. Just gushing all the time, gushing.
Well, no, I watched a bit of.
What is the point of gushing Glastonbury?
Caroline, her name is, and I thought she was dreadful. I didn't like the songs very much, and she was clearly not young, but she was wearing a sort of like pink romper suit straight from a playpen. The audience loved her. I thought she was like watching a Barbie doll on stage. But it was really. So I think what's really happened is the audience tastes, especially amongst people younger than we have changed from both what we think should happen and also from what Glastonbury used to be. So we're now judging how it happens and what its impact is on old standards, but things have moved on, and they may not be the way they'd like it to have moved on, but they certainly moved on. I mean, there was acts there like I saw Fred again, who went down an absolute storm, and basically like 90s rave tropes with a little bit of like Caribou, which is more recent dance music. And then the only input beyond the rave beats in the synthesizer repetitive lines was samples of people who weren't famous people talking about mental health problems in different ways. And that was like the main thrust of each track. And the audience loved it. And I thought this is basically repetitive beats with some babble repeated on top of each track. And I thought this is a form of watching a form of madness unfold in front of me. But it went down an absolute storm. So, you know, it's really hard to argue with like 100,000 people.
I guess there are times when I'm an old, what am I, 62, and I do regularly sound like an old grump. And one has to look at it maybe somewhat dispassionately about how people react to things in the moment when they're there, which is still not ever going to come across on television. It is different to being there. We know that from the gigs that we go to. It's never the same. It can't be, and therefore actually the impact. You use Fred again as an example. They were one of the ones that was very strongly being pushed as potential stars for next year, that their rise is going to be quick. So, and that's something that I can't judge or gauge with. But you see, as you say, the reaction from the crowd tells you where that is leading, and so there is some judgment, therefore, still as to what is going to catch on. And it's very different from my ears hearing what I like to what a young person might judge as what's going to excite them for the next year.
Things have changed. When John Lennon did his Plastic Ono Band 1970, which is very autobiographical and very confessional, very much about his mental health issues. It didn't sell that well. I thought he was being a bit self-indulgent and miserable at the time, although it's sort of like a classic album. But when you do that now with a dance beat or a bit of electro synth, everybody thinks it's absolutely so. Times have changed.
They have. Well, Graham, there's Glastonbury for this year. Massive attendances as usual. I think £330 minimum ticket cost. So it's a money earner and it's hugely popular, and long will that be the case. More complicated is a topic which we've discussed quite a lot, the future of cinemas and where that goes. And on one level, then this is just the announcement that Curzon Ripon will be closing on July the 1st. And on one level, I'm saying, well, I think there's an inevitability about this. This is England's smallest city. It didn't have a cinema for 31 years. It was ambitious both on the part of the Stern family to create a cinema from a standing start, and for Curzon to take on a 25-year lease, which they brought to a crashing halt after only 10 years on the grounds, quote, that it is unviable, and the suggestion being that Ripon has specific conditions unlike anywhere else, which they didn't choose to mention, but they added a corollary. The statement in the corollary was that since in that decade, there has been new cinemas that have come on board nearby, and I'm taking it that they mean Everyman in Harrogate, and now, more significantly, I think, a whole new building block that's gone into this, Everyman in Northallerton, which is surely not that dissimilar a place to Ripon. So that's what they're saying. That's their reasoning.
This is absolute piffle.
Mm.
First of all, if I lived in Ripon, if Curzon Ripon was a great art house cinema,
Yeah.
I wouldn't bother going to Everyman in Harrogate or now the new Everyman in Northallerton.
No.
I would go to Curzon. I personally did not go to Curzon Cinema that often because every time I looked at the programme, it was either a commercial mainstream film which I didn't want to see, which I could see at the Odeon in Harrogate, or that it was an art house film which I could only see at Tuesday at 10 a.m. on one screening. So once again, an art house cinema chain has divided its focus between being an art house cinema and being a mainstream cinema. Now, when you're a town-sized operation or a city-sized operation of a normal-sized city, you can split your focus that way. It does work. It works at Everyman in Harrogate. It works at Everyman in cinemas in cities. But as you know very well, Ripon as a city is actually a small town.
Exactly.
So Ripon is too small to split its focus between mainstream and art house and quality and independent movies. If you're going to succeed in Ripon as a cinema, you need to focus on creating a very loyal, hardcore base. And you do that by only showing good films. You don't squeeze the good films in between the latest Spider-Man. You dedicate yourself, you focus on good films only, interesting films. And that way you may build up an audience that's happy to come out every single week and keep the thing going.
Which is partly based on trust, isn't it?
But we can't do that because it was too risky. We need to play safe and book mainstream films. And the problem with that is that the mainstream film audience, since COVID, has never quite come back the same way as it was before.
Which they acknowledge they said COVID was a big factor in this decision, which again also, is more than an excuse. That is a genuine fact. But do you think also that the Curzon experience, the actual cinema going experience, Graham, at Curzon at Ripon was a bit underwhelming?
Yeah, that's the third point. The second point is that the mainstream cinema production system is falling apart. Yes. It's all in DC Comics films. Now, a lot of your hardcore cinema audience are in their 60s or older. They do not, in general, want to go to superhero films. They want quality films. And that's the one thing that most cinema chains don't bother doing anymore. So in a small place like Ripon, to alienate your older viewer is disastrous. They do not want to see Spider-Man films. But you're right, the other thing is that the design of a Curzon cinema is lacking in the modern world. It's more interesting to look at, and the interior design is better than Odeon, your old school Odeon, which is never quite true in the 21st century, even though it's tried. It looks Spartan, sparse, minimalistic. It's neither cozy feeling like the Cameo in Edinburgh, that glorious old cinema, which is part of the Picture House chain, nor is it cozy like the films in Edinburgh, which may or may not reopen at some point. But neither is it very comfortable and luxurious like Everyman, where you sit on your couch and you get food and drink brought to your table. It's none of those boxes. When you pay your, not cheap amount of money to see a film at Curzon, anywhere, Ripon we're talking about, all you get for your money really is a quite hard chair and the screen that shows you the film. In these days, in the world post-COVID, in the world of Spider-Man number 25, that's not going to work.
No. I mean, that space downstairs was never quite clear really what that was. It was never a full-scale cafe. There wasn't a cafe kind of culture about the place. I didn't ever feel it was one of those things you'd go and sit there for a cup of coffee. It didn't kind of ever quite have that atmosphere. There was the other room upstairs that I never quite knew what it was, the mysterious third room upstairs that existed, but I'm not quite sure how that was being used. Now, which brings us to the fact that Robert Stern has issued a very positive statement about what could happen next year.
Stern Properties. Yeah, Stern Properties, who own the cinema on North Street.
Yeah, and also have bought the former Swing Baths as well to do, quotes, a community project. Now, they are talking, Graham, as you would have seen, of retaining one screen as a community cinema And then on top of that, you would have some kind of retail, some kind of cafe, probably. It'll take a while to do this. I do wonder if in some ways this is more like the Weatherby cinema model that seems to do okay, where it isn't about answering endlessly to the big need to have the Spider-Man films, etc., where actually it's about putting on a good film each week at a reasonable ticket price with other things happening in that space as well. Maybe that model is more likely to work in Ripon.
I think you're entirely right. If you could replicate the ethos and the approach and the feel of Weatherby film theatre in Ripon and what was the Curzon Ripon space, I think that would work. The big question, of course, is what that's going to happen, because the real danger is that if you don't get that right, rather than having 2 or 3 screens to get it wrong on, you've now only got 1 screen to get it wrong on, which means even less money for you than before. So with a 1 screen project, you really have to get it spot on. It's not going to survive. You're going to have like an audience of 10 people a week.
Well, I think the basic rule is avoid all these ridiculous Marvel movies that are just tedious and play to a cult audience. It's quite a big cult audience, but frankly, I actually think they're overall damaging cinema rather than benefiting cinema. This narrow obsession with a fantasy world, when the real world actually produces far more interesting stories to talk about.
Well, exactly. I mean, the audience used to be broad. There used to be films for every type of person in every age group. Hollywood would spend a lot of money making successful comedies, making successful romantic movies, successful dramas. Now all the money goes to like CGI and most hero films. So it's squeezed out most of the audience for the sake of easy money, because these films do make money. It's undermined its own audience, which is why the viewing figures for the Oscars get worse every year. Because people aren't interested. Only certain people actually care now. Whereas before, when it was a much broader industry, everybody cared.
The backdrop, additionally, today you will have seen the announcement in relation to Cineworld, which of course also has the picture house chain. So that's City Screen in the case of York as well, announcing that they are going in to bankruptcy. And so, but what has been made clear, though, however, is that this is not going to lead to the closure of cinemas. It's about a financial restructuring that will not lead to the closing of cinemas. Do you believe that will be the case?
I do, but not 100%. Because as you know, these days, in the way the Western economies work, you can fail but not fail. It's a really strange setup where you can actually go to administration, but that doesn't mean anything, really, except you're trying to rig problems. And there's a lot of wriggle room now for companies to get out the problems and get out the hole they're in.
Which is what they're trying to do.
I think they'll be cut slack to keep going if the people with the money who could pull the plug reckon there is a future in the mass cinema audience going forward. And that's a bit of a question to answer.
Yes.
Exactly. So I'm hoping the answer is in the affirmative, but if the people behind it who they owe money to start thinking like they're never going to revive this, the mass cinema audience is never back. Those days are over. Well, in that case, they might really. But I certainly hope they're not.
And the further backdrop this is all against is a continuing disappointment in the films that have been released this year. We were clinging quite in high hopes that Asteroid City might be one of the films that we'll be championing by the end of the year. But Graham, the question that you're going to ask here, the cult of Wes Anderson, could it finally have run out? If so, 2-part question, therefore. If it has run out, part 2, why has it run out?
I don't think the audience has gone away. He's still got a big cult audience. He's one of the last film directors who a reasonable amount of people go to see purely because of the director's name, no matter what the film is. That's quite rare these. So there is a cult of Wes Anderson, but I think critics are losing patience because his films are so meticulously shot and they're so pernickety and they're so detailed. And the problem with these films throughout has always been the danger of that is that the details take over from the direction, the details take over from the meaning, the details take over from the themes. So when the script has big themes and emotional content and the characters mean something, like the Royal Tenenbaums or the Grand Budapest Hotel, or even his animated One Isle of Dogs, when it's got a good script, the combination of that and the emotion and his mastery of detail and visuals.
Yes.
Just makes it superb. But when you got films, for example, The French Dispatch, which I couldn't get my head around, it's all well acted and it's brilliantly made, but what does it actually mean, and do I really care? Ooh, actually, I don't.
No.
So he does, every now and again he comes proper. So the question was, would Asteroid City be Grand Budapest Hotel or French Dispatch? And the critics can't quite make their mind up, and I think it lies somewhere in between. I saw it on Saturday,
Yeah.
and I was like, I was pleasantly reassured because it has some emotional content, it has some meaning. It isn't just brilliantly shot and brilliantly acted and full of quirky, colourful, majestic details. It does amount to something. It's really about American society and politics in the 50s, and it's about loss, and it's about love, and it's about a play within a play. It's about the nature of an actor and the nature of directing. So those are all big themes, and it does carry those themes right to the film.
Yeah.
And it does leave a little bit of a essence afterwards. It's not like you eat it, then it's gone. There's a little bit left, but it's still a bit bitty. You know, when he doesn't get it right, he is bitty, and it's still a little bit bitty compared to. I mean, what carries the Grand Budapest Hotel is the depth of the story and the central character he finds, because he's a great actor, and it's such a serious theme. It's about fascism and the cruelty of fascism, and so it has an emotional impact. And Asteroid City doesn't quite have that, but it has more of it than The French Dispatch. That's for sure.
I find with Wes Anderson's film, sometimes you're rewarded by seeing it more than once. I think he's one of those. There's so much detail in his films: visual detail, language detail, theme detail, performance detail, that sometimes, although you should be able to judge a film on one viewing, I think he's one of those directors that you're rewarded for seeing a film more than once.
That's true. And I possibly would see this a second time. Like I wouldn't watch French Dispatch again,
No.
and for reviewing on this show. But I would watch City again. And the cast is like even more amazing. I mean, it's got Tom Hanks, Steve Carell, Jason Schwartzman, Scarlett Johansson, Ed Norton, Bryan Cranston, Tilda Swinton, and that's only scraping the surface. There's a lot more than that. And it's got Rupert Friend. I didn't even recognize at first. Rupert Friend plays a cowboy in a cowboy hat and matching blue jeans, set in this small desert town in America in the 1950s. And at first, you don't even recognize him, and he's very good as a 1950s cowboy. And then, of course, you've got two songs by Jarvis Cocker. So it's quite a treat to realize, God, that's Jarvis Cocker singing a Wes Anderson film. So that was quite entertaining as well.
What draws actors to working with him? That might seem a banal question, but you just run through that list there of great Hollywood names that want to work with Wes Anderson. What draws actors to him?
Well, who makes films like Wes Anderson? Nobody.
That's a good answer. You don't need you don't really need a long answer to that. That is a factor, isn't it? No one makes films like him.
Yeah. So they're always interesting films. Then, of course, you've got the fact that his films always do have a lot of star names, which it always makes it easier for other star names to
then join
next film.
Yeah.
Look at all the, like he's got a great CV, so why wouldn't you get involved? Even Tom Hanks is in this one, and he's not really an art house actor, really, is he?
There was a time this would apply to Woody Allen films.
Well, yeah, until the semi-scandal with Mia Farrow. Yeah, that's true. That's the same thing used to happen to him. You're right. Although Woody's films were always very human. The problem with Woody Allen films was never wasn't enough emotion, or the characters weren't real enough. He was always good at that.
Yeah, absolutely. As well as being intellectual and witty. Perfect combination.
Exactly, yeah. I miss Woody Allen films when he was young and better and wasn't mired in.
Which, of course, he ended up making a joke about. I loved your films, the early ones. I can't remember which film that's in of Woody Allen's, where everyone who comes up to him says that line, "Loved your films," especially the early ones. So he got so annoyed about it, he actually put it in a film.
Yeah, but it didn't go down well because it was his attempt to sort of 8.5 autobiographical based on Fellini. Memories, which followed Annie Hall Manhattan, and that was the gag that was. But it didn't endear him to.
No. So overall, Graham, would you say go to Asteroid City rather than not go to Asteroid City?
Yeah, I would say so, because I actually felt some genuine emotions at times, especially towards the end. So I thought there's a bit of a heart here. It isn't just quirky genius.
No, and quirky genius can become self-indulgent. It's quite a
Well,
journey
it's
that
like
can
I
go
like
on.
that this duo called the Lemon Twigs,
Mm,
but I think they've done 5 albums now. I only bought two.
mm.
I can't buy any more because they're so quirky. That a little bit of quirky is great. 5 albums of quirky gets a bit annoying.
You want to send them to Albuquerque. That's right. Now, Graham, I feel that the subject that you've been wanting to push at us for several weeks may even have to still hold for another week if you can think of an interesting interruption instead of us talking about books on India, which
Oh
we have
yeah,
discussed once, or
well,
if you feel that within that short time left of 3 minutes, your final
yeah,
thoughts on
it's
Indian can squeeze into that
way
space.
too. You can't do India in 2 minutes or 5 minutes. That's ridiculous.
That's what I'm
No, I
thinking.
bumped into Tom Till recently. He's a stand-up comic. I
Yeah.
met him as a young guy first about 10 years ago. When he's only about 20 or something,
Mm,
and he was not only a stand-up comic, he set up a comedy club in Harrogate,
he
and
did.
it was really
And
successful. He brought
he expanded it to York, Graham, as well.
exactly, yeah. So he's still going, but I hadn't talked to him for about 5 years.
No.
Bumped him at Harrogate. We're talking about the effect of COVID and
Mm,
the energy crisis and inflation on comedy. And he said, what's interesting now is that because of the cost of doing everything, little local comedy clubs are springing up everywhere. People don't want to travel. So,
mm,
so the comedians now play much more locally. They're much more reluctant, unless you're a big name in comedy, get paid a lot.
mm.
You're not going to travel like 2 hours to play a gig, then come back because
No.
it's too bloody expensive to do it. So
Mm.
everything's local now, which he says is great for local comedy.
Yeah.
But he said for him, if he wants to book an act from London, he can't really do it because if they're super famous, he can't afford to book them. But
No.
if they're not famous, he has to pay them so much money to come from London for
Mm,
the show that it's not worth it for him. So
mm.
everything's becoming more local, regional in comedy, which is a quite interesting effect of the British economy, I would say.
Is he based it back in the Harrogate area now? Is Tom? I mean, because that's the first time his name has been mentioned. I hadn't. It's one of those. I suddenly thought, do you know when did I even don't know what he's been up to? Don't know what that's a typical example actually of someone who I'm not saying he's gone off the radar. Maybe I've just not observed it. So what has been his own story in that time?
Well, I was chatting to him in Baker and Belton's while getting
Mm,
I think it was Norwegian salt beef sandwich,
excellent.
as you
Recommend
do.
it from there always. Yes.
I could see that both the staff and all the customers were getting annoyed that I was holding over.
Ah,
So I couldn't go into that much detail because
no.
people were quietly scowling.
Mm. So
But
so
yeah,
he
he's
so it
still
remains a
living
bit of a
there.
mystery then what he's up to. Mm,
He still seems successful. Still seems busy.
mm,
It was good. I've got one
mm.
more thing to see you, Charles.
Yes,
I've heard a Dexys track from an album, The Feminine Divine. Have you heard the track?
I've heard several tracks. If
The
you
Dexys.
go, if I know you won't go, I know you won't go onto Spotify, but just to say that if anyone does go onto Spotify to play Dexys, actually, still interestingly, it's Dexys and Dexys Midnight Runners tracks under Dexys Midnight Runners, and there are about 4 of the new songs on there. And of course, this album it's an apology to how he thinks he's treated women in song through the years, and this is
Mm.
Kevin. He's doing his
That's
bit
interesting.
of it's rather like which of the Thomas Hardy wrote all those poems as an apology to how he treated his wife. I'm not suggesting this is anything from Kevin's personal life that is drawing attention to, but just overall how he thinks his attitude towards women in song has not been right.
You've been listening to the podcast Two Big Egos in a Small Car. Your hosts were Graham Chalmers and Charles Hutchinson. This was a Baltic sub-production.